47 delegations, 1,000 voices, a palace that rearranged its own stars to impress them, and at the center of it all, a queen smiled. Perfectly. The way she had been trained to smile since before she could walk. Behind her, beside the ceremonial dais of space, small, empty, still warm from the body that had been standing there moments ago. A child's footprints glowed faint in the heat signature of the polished floor, already fading. No alarm sounded, no system flagged the absence, because no system had ever imagined a princess would simply walk away. But she did. Through corridors that grew darker, past walls that stopped watching, into a part of the palace where crowns meant nothing and the air smelled like metal and tired humans. She was looking for silence. She found a soldier instead. He was sleeping. His mind, for the first time she had ever felt in anyone, was completely quiet. She sat beside him. And the empire began to unravel. The palace of Solanthus was not built. It was composed. The way a symphony is composed, layer upon layer of intention, stone that remembered, light that listened, ceilings that curved like frozen tides, walls alive with slow-moving constellations that rearranged themselves based on who stood nearby. And floors that adjusted gravity by gentle fractions, so that no visiting species felt too heavy or embarrassingly light. It was the kind of place that made you forget it was a building at all. And on this particular morning, the palace was doing everything at once. Every trick, every flourish, every impossible detail polished to the point of arrogance. Because today was the Alliance Convergence, the largest diplomatic gathering in a decade. Delegations from 47 star systems, languages that clicked, pulsed, hummed, or simply arrived inside your skull without permission. The air itself seemed nervous. Queen Thessara stood at the center of it all, tall, still, her long ears angled slightly back in the posture that royal etiquette manuals described as attentive serenity. Her crown rested between those ears, older than most of the treaties being celebrated today, heavier than it looked. She had worn it so long that her neck no longer complained, but her shoulders remembered. She smiled, inclined her head, acknowledged a greeting delivered in harmonic tones that required 3 separate vocal organs to produce. She responded in the delegation's own tongue, flawlessly. Her thoughts, however, were somewhere else entirely, because somewhere behind her, somewhere just to the left of the ceremonial dais, a 6-year-old girl was being impossibly, miraculously, dangerously patient. Princess Aelith had been standing still for 41 minutes, which, by any reasonable standard, for any child of any species, was not patience, it was endurance. She stood with her small hands folded exactly as instructed. Her ceremonial dress was stiff in places it should not have been stiff. Her shoes pinched. Her crown, a miniature version of her mother's, sat slightly crooked because she had tried to scratch her ear 13 minutes ago and nudged it. She had not fixed it, because fixing it would require moving, and moving would require attention, and attention was the last thing Aelith wanted. The hall pressed against her from every direction, not physically, not in any way a sensor could detect, but inside, deep behind her eyes, where thoughts were supposed to be quiet. The noise was unbearable. Not sound noise, not exactly, feeling noise. Aelith had never found the right word for it. When lots of people gathered close, she could sense them, not their thoughts, not clearly, but their emotions, their moods, their fears and boredom and hunger and pride. All of it bleeding into her like light through thin curtains. In a room with 5 people, it was uncomfortable. In a hall with hundreds of delegates from 47 star systems, each species projecting a different emotional frequency, each one louder than the last. It was agony. But Aelith did not say this. She had tried once, months ago. She had told her tutor that the room felt too full. The tutor had smiled and said, "You will grow accustomed to it." She had told a palace physician that her head hurt when people were angry nearby. The physician had run scans, found nothing, and recommended hydration. She had told her mother, once, late at night, that sometimes the world was too loud even when no one was speaking. Thassara had held her close and said, "I know, but you are strong," which was kind and warm and completely useless. So Aelith learned to do what all children learn when adults cannot hear them properly. She stopped explaining. She started enduring. And she was very, very good at it. Until she wasn't. A delegation from the Helios cluster was presenting a gift. Something involving controlled miniature lightning. Tiny bolts arcing between crystal pillars. Blue and white and beautiful. The crowd murmured in appreciation. Aelith watched with genuine interest. For a moment, just a moment, she forgot where she was. She forgot the noise. She forgot the feelings pressing on her skull. She was just a child, watching lightning dance and thinking it was beautiful. Then one of the Helios envoys bowed too deeply. A spark discharged. 3 aides yelped. A security officer dropped his ceremonial spear with a clang that echoed off the frozen wave ceiling. The hall laughed. Measured laughter. Approved laughter. The kind that had been rehearsed in a mirror. And with that laugh came a wave. Every emotion in the room surged at once. Amusement, embarrassment, superiority, relief, nervousness. All of it slamming into Aelith like a door thrown open in a storm. Her ears flattened, her vision blurred, her hands, still folded, began to shake. She tugged at her mother's sleeve, gentle, desperate, the smallest possible cry for help. Thassara did not notice, because Thassara was responding to a compliment, a layered one, the kind that acknowledged ancestral wisdom, referenced mutual defense treaties, and contained a joke about orbital taxation that was only funny if you understood 3 separate economic collapses. Thassara's response was flawless. It always was. Aelith let go of the sleeve. She stood there for 5 more seconds, trembling, the emotional noise filling her skull until she could not distinguish her own thoughts from the flood. She felt dizzy, she felt sick, she felt invisible, all at once. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was that no one could see it happening. She was breaking apart in the middle of a celebration, and to everyone watching, she was simply a princess, standing still, being good, being strong. She took a breath, small and sharp, and something inside her made a decision that her brain would only understand later. She stepped backward, 1 step, behind a decorative pillar shaped like a blooming starflower. The light shifted around her, the voices dimmed, not enough, but enough to think. No alarm sounded, no gasp rippled through the crowd. In a room filled with beings trained to observe everything, beings with enhanced vision, telepathic awareness, motion-sensitive appendages. Not one of them noticed the moment a 6-year-old princess simply, quietly, walked away because she was small, and small things disappear easily when no one is looking for them. The palace tracked her biometrics. Of course it did. Heart rate, body temperature, location signature. But the systems were calm, because nothing in their programming suggested that a royal child would voluntarily leave a state event. The category did not exist, so Aelith walked through the side corridor that curved away from the grand chamber like a sentence no one meant to finish. Past the staff hallways where the floor markers glowed a soft, functional blue. Past a maintenance drone that paused, scanned her, emitted a confused chime, and then continued on, deciding, apparently, that this was above its pay grade. She passed 2 junior aides arguing in fierce whispers about whether a plasma fountain could be classified as a weapon. Neither noticed her. She kept walking, and with each step, the noise faded, the feelings dimmed, the pressure behind her eyes loosened like a fist slowly opening. She could feel the edges of her own thoughts again, could hear her own breathing, could remember that she was Aelith, not a vessel for everyone else's emotions, just Aelith. The polished floors gave way to plainer surfaces. The walls stopped rearranging themselves. The air changed, less filtered elegance, more metal, more warmth, more real. Aelith's ears rose slowly, tentatively, like animals checking whether the storm had passed. She passed a junction where the lighting panels were older, dimmer. She heard boots on metal somewhere distant. She heard a laugh, not measured, not approved, just a laugh, real and rough and unplanned. Someone said something about a reactor hum changing pitch. Someone else blamed maintenance technique. A third person mentioned that gravity had temporarily disappeared from Section 4 last time. Aelith smiled. They did not know she was here. They were not performing for her. They were just people, being people, and their feelings, even from this distance, were simpler, smaller, manageable. Tiredness, humor, mild annoyance, nothing loud enough to hurt. She walked until the corridors widened into a resting area outside the barracks. The lighting was softer here, functional rather than impressive. A vending unit hummed in the corner, displaying food that looked like it had been designed by someone who hated both nutrition and joy. She passed a junction where the lighting panels were older, dimmer. She heard boots on metal somewhere distant. She heard a laugh, not measured, not approved, just a laugh, real and rough and unplanned. Someone down a corridor she could not see said something about a reactor hum changing pitch. Someone else blamed maintenance technique. A third person mentioned that gravity had temporarily disappeared from Section 4 last time, and nobody had filed a report because nobody wanted to explain how they ended up on the ceiling. Aelith smiled. They did not know she was here. They were not performing for her. They were not arranging their faces into the expressions they thought a princess should see. They were just people, being people, and their feelings, even from this distance, were simpler, smaller, manageable, tiredness, humor, mild annoyance at a broken gravity regulator, nothing loud enough to hurt. She walked until the corridors widened into a common area. The ceiling was lower here, practical. The floor did not adjust gravity. It was just a floor. The walls displayed nothing but maintenance schedules and a faded notice about the proper storage of thermal equipment that someone had amended with a handwritten note reading. This means you, Hendrix. There were no paintings here, no statues, no carefully placed art designed to inspire appropriate emotional responses in visitors. Just corridor, just distance, just the steady, functional lighting that said, you are somewhere. It does not matter where. Nothing is expected of you here. Aelith had not realized how much she needed that. To be somewhere that expected nothing, to walk through a space that did not react to her presence, that did not adjust its gravity or rearrange its constellations or modulate its temperature based on her biometric profile. She was just a girl walking through a hallway, anonymous, ordinary, invisible. It was wonderful. She could feel the palace exhaling behind her, the great machinery of diplomacy and power releasing its hold on her. Step by step, breath by breath, she was walking away from the noise and towards something she could not name yet. But her body knew, her ears knew, her heart knew. Towards silence, toward the place where she could hear herself think again. She did not know where she was going. She only knew that for the first time that day. No one was looking at her like she was made of glass. And that, she decided, was enough. Ren Harlow had not planned to fall asleep. This was important, because intention mattered. At least that was what he told himself as his head tilted back against the bench in the barracks common area. Boots still on, armor half unfastened, eyes closing against direct orders from his own brain. The night patrol had been long, 12 hours of walking corridors that did not need walking, checking seals that did not need checking, and one incident, one genuinely memorable incident, involving a cargo drone that had developed something uncomfortably close to existential dread, mid-flight, and refused to land until someone explained the purpose of scheduled maintenance. Wren had talked it down, not because he was trained in drone psychology, but because he was tired enough to be honest. And honesty, it turned out, was the only thing that worked on a machine having a crisis. He had sat in the cargo bay, looked up at a hovering rectangle that was refusing to fulfill its basic function, and told it that yes, maintenance seemed pointless, but sometimes you showed up anyway, because that was the deal. You functioned, you kept functioning, even when you were not sure why. The drone had considered this for 11 seconds, then landed, then filed a formal complaint about the meaninglessness of scheduled lubrication. The complaint was still working its way through the administrative system. Wren suspected it would outlast several treaties. So now he sat, in the barracks, where the light was functional rather than impressive, where the air smelled like cleaning solvent and recycled oxygen and humans who had worked too long, where a vending unit hummed in the corner, offering food that looked like it had been designed by someone who actively resented the concept of flavor. The common area was the one place in the palace where the walls did not try to impress you. The ceiling was a ceiling. The floor was a floor. The bench was a bench that had been replaced twice and repaired 4 times and bore the scratches and stains of 1,000 soldiers who had sat on it after 1,000 long shifts. There was graffiti on the underside. He had noticed it weeks ago. Someone had scratched a small drawing of a ship. Beside it, someone else had written, "Marcus was here, and wishes he wasn't." Beneath that, a third hand had added, "Seconded." Wren liked the graffiti. He liked the scratches. He liked that this bench had a history that was not recorded in any archive, that it held the weight of tired people without complaint, that it asked nothing of anyone who sat on it. It was honest furniture, the rarest thing in a palace full of walls that watched and floors that adjusted. He told himself he would close his eyes for 2 minutes, just 2. Then he would change his armor, file his patrol report, eat something terrible from the vending unit, and continue being a perfectly acceptable low-ranking soldier in an empire that did not particularly notice him. 2 minutes. The universe, as usual, had other ideas. Here is something no one tells you about grief. It does not arrive. It does not stay. It does not leave. It lives in you the way weather lives in a valley. Sometimes the sky is clear, and you forget. You forget for whole minutes, sometimes hours, that anything was ever wrong. And then a cloud moves, the light changes, and the valley floods. Wren dreamed. Not the good dreams, not the ones where Mika was laughing and pulling at his sleeve and demanding he tell the story about the star that got lost and asked a comet for directions. Not those. He dreamed about a robin. 3 years ago, the colony on the Outer Ring, 4,200 civilians, a research station, a school, a market where someone sold fried dough that Mika loved so much she would eat it until she got the hiccups. The colony had no strategic value. It produced no weapons. It threatened no one. It was simply a place where people lived and where children went to school and argued about homework and named stars from their bedroom windows. The attack came at night. Not raiders, not pirates, something worse. A territorial dispute between 2 neighboring systems that had nothing to do with a robin at all. The colony was simply in the way. Wren had been on perimeter patrol when the first strike hit. The ground shook, the sky turned orange, and Wren ran. Everyone ran. But running through rubble is not like running through corridors. You climb, you crawl, you choose wrong turns because the streets you memorize no longer exist. You call out names into smoke that swallows sound. He reached his quarters in 17 minutes. The door was gone. The wall was gone. The window where Mika liked to sit and watch the stars was a jagged hole open to the burning sky. Mika was 4 years old. Shh. Her bed had been near that window, the one she liked because she could see the stars from it. She had named 3 of them. The names were silly and perfect, and Ren could not say them aloud anymore. She had told him once, very seriously, that the smallest star was shy, that it needed the other two to feel brave. He had laughed. She had not been joking. He did not reach her in time. That sentence, those 7 words, he had rebuilt his entire life around them. Every decision since, every transfer request, every midnight patrol in a palace that did not need him. All of it was structure built around a hole that nothing could fill. He asked for reassignment to Salanthus, the capital, the safest place in the empire, far from colonies, far from borders, far from anywhere a child might laugh in a way that sounded like hers, which was everywhere. Of course, because children laugh everywhere. That is what they do, in every single time, for one terrible fraction of a second. Ren would turn his head, looking for a face he would never see again. He did not talk about it. Soldiers did not. They carried their damage the way they carried their equipment, in silence, efficiently, until the weight became indistinguishable from their own body. Captain Rena had noticed, his former commanding officer. She had signed his transfer without question and written a note, one line, handwritten, which was unusual for someone who preferred efficiency. It said, "You are allowed to stop running." He had folded it, put it in his chest pocket, and continued running. He had been at Solanthus for 14 months now, long enough to learn the rhythms, the shift changes, the protocols that mattered, and the protocols that existed only because someone had written them down centuries ago, and no one had thought to ask whether they still made sense. I was good at his job, not exceptional, not remarkable, just good. The kind of good that does not attract attention, which was the point. Attention meant questions. Questions meant conversation. Conversation meant the risk of someone asking where he had served before. And before was a door he kept locked. The other soldiers knew him as reliable, quiet, willing to take extra shifts, willing to trade holidays, willing to do anything that kept him busy and kept the silence at bay. They did not know why he was the way he was. They did not ask. Soldiers were good at recognizing the perimeter of another person's grief and staying outside it. He had a bunk, a locker, 3 sets of regulation clothing, a data pad he used exclusively for patrol reports, and one photograph, small, creased, kept inside a standard issue manual where no one would think to look. Mika, age 3, laughing at something off camera, her hands covered in the blue paste she used for finger painting. The paste was in her hair, on her nose, on the wall behind her, everywhere except the paper it was intended for. He did not look at the photograph often, but he kept it, because some things you carry not because they help, but because putting them down would mean admitting they are over. Aelith found him sleeping. She had been walking for what felt like a long time, but was probably 15 minutes. The corridors had changed, no more constellations, no more adjusting gravity, just metal and lighting panels and the distant sound of machinery breathing. The barracks' common area was almost empty. Most soldiers were either on duty or had found more interesting places to rest. A pair of boots sat abandoned near a locker. A jacket hung over a chair back as if its owner had evaporated mid-task. The bench where Ren sat was against the far wall, near the vending unit, near nothing important. Aelith stopped in the doorway. She looked at him. I was not like the guards near her mother. No polished armor, no ceremonial posture, just a human. Tired, leaning back, mouth slightly open, breathing in the steady rhythm of someone who had given up fighting consciousness. And here was the thing, the remarkable, impossible, world-altering thing that Aelith noticed immediately and would remember for the rest of her life. His mind was quiet, not empty. People who are awake are never truly empty. But in sleep, deep, real, exhausted sleep, the emotional noise that Aelith could always sense in everyone around her, that constant humming pressure of feelings and fears and calculations, it was gone. Ren Harlow, asleep, radiated nothing. No expectation, no performance, no careful watching, just the soft, steady nothing of a mind at rest. To Aelith, who had spent the last hour drowning in the emotional noise of hundreds of beings, it was like stepping out of a hurricane into a meadow. She moved closer, careful, quiet, the way children move when they have found something precious and are afraid it might vanish. She climbed onto the bench beside him. He did not wake. She sat very still, feeling the quiet pour over her like cool water. Her ears, which had been twitching and flattening all day, slowly, slowly relaxed. She leaned against his arm. It was warm, and it smelled like metal and soap and something human that she did not have a word for. But the word, if it existed, would be something close to safe. Aelith closed her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, the world stopped screaming. She slept, but not for long, not at first. She woke once. The bench was hard. The air smelled wrong. She opened her eyes to find Ren stirring beside her, blinking, looking down at her with the confused expression of a man whose 2-minute nap had been invaded by a very small alien. He had knelt to her level, spoken gently, asked if she was lost. She had said no. She had said the loud place made her head hurt, and she needed somewhere not full of feelings. She said it plainly, without shame, the way a child reports the weather. He did not understand all of it, but he understood a tired child, so he told her he would take her back to where she belonged. In a moment, after he got his bearings, Aelith had looked at him with those dark, serious eyes and said, "Can I sit here, just for a little while? It is so quiet near you." And Ren, who should have immediately reported a wandering royal child, who should have activated his communicator and filed an alert and done every single thing his training required, instead sat down beside her, because she reminded him of someone, and the someone she reminded him of had never gotten to ask for one more moment of quiet. He told her a story about a tired knight who was not shiny or impressive, but who showed up every day anyway. He told her being brave was not about fighting. Mostly it was about not leaving. He did not know why he said that. Or maybe he did. Aelith had leaned against his arm, her ears relaxing for the first time that day. And somewhere between the tired knight's second adventure and his third, Ren's head tilted back, his eyes closed, and the exhaustion of a 12-hour patrol and 3 years of sleepless grief pulled him under. Aelith felt him go quiet, felt the last hum of his waking thoughts fade, and in that perfect silence, she followed him into sleep. This time, she did not wake. 16 minutes. That was how long it took for Queen Thessara to notice the absence. Not because she was careless, not because she was distracted, but because the ceremony required her. Fully, every second, every syllable. The Alliance convergence was not an event one could pause, but at the 16-minute mark, something shifted. Not a sound, not an alert, not a signal, just absence. The particular emptiness that a mother feels when the weight beside her simply vanishes. Thessara's ears pivoted forward, then froze. Her gaze flicked to the space beside the dais. Empty. Nothing but polished floor and the faint ghost of a child's footprints in the heat signature. A cold blade slid between her ribs. Not real. Worse. The kind that severs thought. And then, centuries of training slammed down on the panic and held it still. She finished the sentence she was speaking, inclined her head, completed the ceremonial gestures. Only then did she turn. Her voice was low, steady. "Aelith," she said to the nearest guard. One word, the guard followed her gaze. His posture stiffened. Another checked the perimeter. A third consulted a wrist console. Frowned, checked again. "Expand the search," Thessara said. High Marshal Corvain received the alert 30 seconds later. He was stationed in the operations nexus, a room designed for crisis. He was built for this room, tall, broad. Alith's biometric signature pulsed on the display. Active, moving, alive. She is in the Eastern Service corridors, he reported over the internal channel. No distress indicators. She does not trigger distress indicators when she is overwhelmed, Thesara replied. She goes quiet. That is the problem. Corvain paused. He had served Thesara for 11 years. Understood. Deploying search teams. Across the palace. Doors sealed and unsealed. Drones adjusted. Security protocols unfolded. Entirely too slow for a mother's heartbeat. Thesara moved through corridors with measured speed. Crown still in place. Robes trailing. Guards fell into formation without being told. They checked the meditation gardens first. Alith liked the gardens. A small reptilian diplomat was found instead, napping in a pollen pod. He insisted he had been invited. He had not. The kitchens were next. The head chef, a towering being with 4 arms and a temperament sharpened by decades of deadlines, swore no princess had passed through, though someone small had stolen a sweet cake. With purpose or with nervousness, Thesara asked. The chef blinked all 4 eyes. With speed, Thesara moved on. Drones hovered, bumping into each other with apologetic chimes. One officer reported checking a supply closet containing nothing but spare gravity regulators in a single sock belonging to no one currently employed by the palace. This was noted, then forgotten. As the minutes stretched, Thesara felt the familiar battle inside her chest. The queen knew the statistics. The palace was secure. The capital was calm. No hostile activity, no breaches, no alerts. The likelihood of actual harm was vanishingly small. But the mother was imagining every possible wrong turn, every dark corridor, every emergency access hatch that a small hand could reach, every maintenance shaft that a curious child might explore. The palace was secure. The likelihood of harm was vanishingly small. The mother was imagining every possible mistake. A delegation from the Orith Collective stopped her. 3 beings who communicated through color shifts in their skin. They wanted to discuss trade amendments. Now, Thesara declined with a phrase so diplomatically precise that the delegation actually thanked her for refusing them. Then she turned the corner and pressed her hand flat against the wall. Just for a second. Just to feel something solid. 27 minutes in. Corvain contacted her again. There is something else. The slight tightening in his voice made her stop. Explain. Her location signal experienced interference. Approximately 15 minutes before she was reported missing. 14 seconds. Then restoration. Interference from what? The pattern is consistent with an internal override. Someone within the palace network accessed the tracking subsystem and introduced a micro-delay. Thesara stood very still. The guards felt the temperature drop. You are telling me that someone inside my palace deliberately obscured my daughter's location. It is a possibility we cannot exclude. It is not a possibility. It is either true or it is not. Find out which. Yes, immediately. Thesara closed the channel, stood in the corridor for 3 seconds, breathing, each exhale a decision not to burn the palace down. Then she continued walking, faster. Expand to the outer sectors, she ordered. The guard hesitated. Outer sectors are military access zones. Thesara stopped, turned, looked at him. My daughter does not read access designations. She follows quiet. The guard nodded immediately. They moved toward the barracks. Ren woke to the feeling that something had gone wrong in a way that paperwork could not fix. At first, just awareness, the barracks ceiling, dull lights, then memory arriving in fragments. The child, the story. He had sat down. He had closed his eyes. And now, weight against his side, small, warm, she was still here. He opened one eye. A long ear twitched inches from his face. He closed his eye. He counted to 3. 1. I told her I would take her back. 2. I did not take her back. 3. I am going to lose everything. He opened both eyes. The ear was still there. Attached to a small head of dark hair, a tiny crown sat crooked. A crown. Oh, I had known she was important. The clothes, the bearing. But knowing and seeing that crown were different things. Princess Aelith, currently drooling on his sleeve. His first thought, I need to alert someone. His second, if I move, she wakes. His third, she is sleeping so peacefully. His fourth, the one that broke something inside him. She looks like Mika. Not physically. Different species, different everything. But the way she slept, the way her hand gripped his sleeve with absolute certainty, the way her face had gone soft and open and completely undefended. Every child sleeps the same way when they feel safe. Ren did not move. He sat there, heart hammering, eyes burning, and he watched a princess sleep, not because he was brave or noble, but because 3 years ago he could not sit beside his daughter. And now the universe had placed someone else's child against his side. He would not move. Aelith stirred, one ear flicked, eyes opened slowly. Found him. And she smiled. You snore, she said. You're awake, he managed. Yes. She yawned, unrestrained, completely unroyal. You said you would not fall asleep. I may have miscalculated. My tutor does that. She blames the calendar. Do you know where you are? She looked around. Bunks, lockers, scattered boots. This is where the brave people sleep. Ren swallowed. Who told you that? You did, earlier. Aelith, your mother is probably looking for you. She always looks. Just fact. But it was loud, and the feelings made my head go strange. He looked at her, really looked, at the circles under her eyes, the tension in her jaw. Loud how, like everyone is talking, but not with their mouths, with their insides, and I can hear all of it. Ren was quiet. That sounds exhausting, he said. Aelith stared at him. Something shifted in her expression, small but tectonic. No one says that, she whispered. Says what? That it sounds hard. They say I will get used to it, or that I am strong. It sounds hard, and you should not have to get used to it. Her lower lip trembled, just once. She pressed her face into his sleeve and breathed, and Ren sat very still, and let her. Footsteps, distant but purposeful. Ren's pulse climbed. We should go back, right now. Aelith frowned, ears angled outward, reluctance. Will the lightning people be there again? Probably. And the staring, yes. She sighed, dramatic, precise. I liked it better here. This place is not approved for princesses. I am approved. I am the princess. He could not argue with that. The footsteps grew closer. Ren shifted carefully. In a moment, people are going to come through that door. Important people. Important like my mother. Yes, exactly like your mother. She reached out and gripped his sleeve. Will you stay? The question landed harder than any order he had ever received. I do not think I get to choose. She nodded. That is all right. You tried. The door slid open. No ceremony. Queen Thessara stepped inside, and the air, the light, the very molecules in the room rearranged themselves around her. Her ears were held perfectly still, the way they were when she was thinking carefully about not destroying something. Guards followed. Tight formation. Ren stood so fast his armor clattered loudly. His brain was screaming. Which stance is correct for alien royalty? Is there a hand position for please do not execute me? None of his training covered this. Aelith slid off the bench, walked to her mother, unhurried. Mother? And wrapped her arms around Thessara's legs. Thessara did not move. For one heartbeat, 2, 3. Then she exhaled. in that single breath, every terrified scenario, every corridor searched, every second of controlled panic. She bent down, pressed her forehead to Aelith's, ears curved around her daughter, protective, instinctive. Guards relaxed a fraction, then felt guilty. You vanished. Yes, that was not acceptable. I know. Are you hurt? No. Were you frightened? Only at first, then I met him. All eyes turned to Ren. He felt approximately the size of a defective maintenance bolt. One of the guards stepped forward. Standard procedure. When a royal person was found in an unsecured location with an unauthorized individual. The guard's hand moved toward his restraint device. The Sara raised one finger. The guard stopped. Not because of the finger, because of everything behind it. Stand down, she said, quietly. He is not a threat. With respect, the guard began. I said stand down. The guard stood down. With respect. The Sara turned her attention fully to Ren. She studied him the way she studied intelligence briefings. Carefully, looking for what was present and what was absent, looking for the shape of things. What she saw was this, a man who was terrified, not of her, of the situation. A man who was standing at attention with the rigid posture of someone who expected punishment and would not argue against it. A man whose eyes were red, not from sleep, from something older, something that lived in him the way old injuries live in bones, present always, visible only when the light changed. She saw the armor, unfastened. She saw the wrinkled uniform. She saw the scuff marks on his boots and the stubble on his jaw and every visible sign of a soldier who had been working too long and resting too little. And she saw one more thing, his sleeve, damp where Aelith's face had pressed against it, the small crescent-shaped wrinkles where a child's hand had gripped the fabric and held on. The Sara straightened, looked at him, not as queen addressing subject, as mother evaluating a variable she had not planned for. You, she said, yes, your do not guess my titles. You will choose incorrectly. Understood. She studied him a long moment. You will come with us. Ren's shoulders dropped. Yes, to answer questions. Yes, and to explain why my daughter slept more peacefully beside a stranger than she has in weeks. She turned, Aelith's hand in hers. Ren followed, guards flanking him. As they moved through the corridor, Aelith glanced back. You are still brave, she whispered. Ren almost laughed, almost broke apart. He definitely walked very carefully. And ahead of them, the palace waited, its 1,000 monitoring tools tracking every heartbeat and thermal signature. But not the thing that mattered. Not the way a queen's hand trembled around her daughter's fingers. Not the way a soldier's eyes burned with 3 years of grief. Not the way a 6-year-old girl, walking between them, felt, for the first time in a long time, that the world might have enough quiet in it after all. The palace could not measure any of that, but it was the only thing that was real. The consultation chamber near the royal apartments was not designed for spectacle. That was the point. No constellations moved along the walls. No gravity shifted to flatter visitors. The surfaces were matte, honest. Words landed hard in this room because there was nothing soft to absorb them. A circular table rose from the floor as the Sara entered. Interfaces bloomed across its surface. Restrained, geometric. The kind of technology that existed to be useful rather than impressive. Sit, the Sara said. Ren sat, immediately. The way a man sits when the alternative is falling. Aelith climbed into a chair that was technically too large for her, kicked her feet against the base with quiet satisfaction, looked around the room with the expression of someone who had been in far too many important rooms today and found this one acceptable. 2 guards remained near the door. The Sara dismissed them with a gesture so slight it was almost a thought. They hesitated. I am alone with a 6-year-old and a man who cannot properly fasten his armor, Thesara said. I believe I will survive. The guards left, quickly, having learned that hesitating twice in the queen's presence was a career decision. Ren stared at the table, studied the geometric patterns as if his continued existence depended on understanding their angles. He was acutely aware of his unfastened chestplate, of the scuff marks on his boots, of the fact that he smelled like cleaning solvent and vending unit coffee in 12 hours of patrol, sitting in a room that probably cost more than his entire military career. Thesara did not sit. She stood, arms folded, studying him the way one studies a lock that is opened without a key. Tell me what happened, she said. From the beginning, leave nothing out. So Ren told her. Everything. How he had been resting after night patrol. How the child had appeared in the barracks doorway. How she seemed overwhelmed. Not frightened, not lost, but compressed. As if the world was pressing on her from all sides, and she was trying to become small enough to slip through. How he had knelt to her level, spoken gently, told her he would help her find where she belonged. How she had sat beside him instead. How he had intended to escort her back. How he thought, incorrectly, stupidly, that allowing her a moment to rest would help. How he told her a story about a tired night because she looked like she needed one. How exhaustion won. How he failed. He did not excuse himself. He did not attempt heroics. He simply spoke. Each word delivered with the understanding that honesty was the only currency he had left. Thesara listened without moving, without interrupting, which was somehow more terrifying than if she had been shouting. When he finished, silence, then a small voice. That is not what happened. Both adults turned. Aelith sat straight in her oversized chair, brow furrowed, ears tilted forward with the particular intensity of a child correcting an injustice. It is not, Ren said. No. She shook her head, firm, certain. You told me stories. You made the loud go away, and you did not look at me like I was something that needed to be returned. Thesara's ears shifted, almost imperceptibly. What stories? Thesara asked. About a night, Aelith said, but not a shiny one, a tired one. He said being brave mostly means not leaving. Ren winced. He definitely had not meant to say that part out loud. Did you know who she was? Thesara asked him. I suspected she was important. I did not know she was... He paused. That important. That, Thesara said, is not comforting. I understand. Aelith tugged at her mother's sleeve. He snores. A flicker crossed Thesara's face. Not quite amusement. Not quite anything she would admit to. But the muscles around her mouth moved in a direction that suggested surrender was being considered. My daughter disappears during the most significant diplomatic event of the decade, Thesara said, and is found sleeping beside a human who does not even snore quietly. Ren opened his mouth, closed it. His brain offered several responses. His survival instinct vetoed all of them. Thesara studied him. A long moment, the kind of moment that felt like standing under examination lights. You see her as a child, she said. Ren blinked. That is kind of hard not to. Everyone else sees a future, a symbol, a responsibility, an item on an agenda. She looked down at Aelith, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. The queen folded away, replaced by something less armored. Why did you leave the hall? She asked Aelith. Aelith shrugged, small, tired. It was loud. You have attended events before. This was louder. Everyone looked at me like I was breakable. You are not breakable, Thesara said automatically. I know, but they do not know that. And their worry is loud too. Thesara went very still. Their worry, she repeated. Aelith nodded, matter of fact, as if she were describing the weather. Everyone has feelings that come out of them. Most people do not notice, but I do. And when there are lots of people, All the feelings come at me at once, and it makes my head feel like it is too full. Ren watched the Sara's face, watched the precise moment when understanding arrived, not gently, but with the sharp clarity of a thing that should have been obvious. Would have been obvious, if anyone had known what to look for. How long, the Sara whispered. Aelith frowned. How long what? How long have you been feeling this? The girl thought about it, seriously, with the careful concentration of someone counting something difficult. Always, she said. The Sara ordered the medical evaluation within the hour. Not through official channels, not through the chain of palace physicians and advisory boards and scheduling protocols that would have taken 3 days and produced a committee before producing a diagnosis. She contacted Dr. Alessi Thorane directly, the royal physician, a woman whose competence was matched only by her complete disinterest in palace politics and her visible contempt for anyone who wasted her time. She had once told a visiting admiral that his symptoms were caused by poor diet and excellent self-delusion. The admiral had been so stunned that he changed his diet. It worked. Thorane arrived with 2 scanning units, a biometric array, and the expression of someone who had been interrupted during her only meal of the day and was keeping score. The princess, the Sara said. Yes, you mentioned. Thorane set up her equipment with efficient irritation. What am I looking for? I do not know. That is why I called you. Thorane glanced at the Sara, then at Aelith. Whatever she saw in the queen's face made her stop being annoyed and start being careful. Come here, she said to Aelith, not unkindly, but not gently either, which oddly seemed to put Aelith more at ease. Aelith was accustomed to people handling her like porcelain. Thorane handled her like a patient. There was a difference, and Aelith could feel it. The examination took 40 minutes. Thorane ran neurological scans, empathic frequency mapping, baseline emotional responses. She held devices near Aelith's temples and watched the data with the focused attention of someone reading a language she had not expected to encounter. She asked Aelith questions, direct ones, none of the careful circling that adults usually employed with children. Does this hurt? No. What about when I do this? It tickles. And this? That makes my head feel warm. Good warm or bad warm? Medium warm. Thorane almost smiled. Almost. The Sara stood the entire time, arms folded, watching. Ren had been told to wait in the adjacent room, but no one had told him to sit. So he stood as well, near the door, close enough to hear. He should have left. His part in the story was over. He had been found, questioned. The correct next step was to return to his bunk, file a report, resume being invisible. Except Aelith had looked at him when Thorane arrived. Just once. A quick glance. The kind children give to the one adult they have decided to trust. Not a request, just a check. Are you still there? He stayed. When the tests were done. Thorane stood very still for a long time, looking at her data, reading it again, then a third time, not because she doubted it, because she was choosing her words. Well, the Sara said. Thorane turned. Your daughter has an elevated empathic sensitivity index, significantly elevated. Her neural architecture processes ambient emotional data at a rate approximately 4 times the norm for her species. The Sara stared. In simpler terms, Thorane continued, she feels what other people feel, not thoughts, not specifics, but the emotional temperature of everyone around her, constantly, without filter, without off switch. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of every moment the Sara had missed, every complaint she had attributed to childhood, every night she had heard Aelith toss and turn and assumed it was normal. This is why crowds overwhelm her, the Sara said. Not a question. This is why everything overwhelms her. Crowds are the worst because the input multiplies. But even one person, if that person is experiencing intense emotion, she absorbs it. The guards outside her room, the Sara murmured. She said they breathed too loudly. It was not their breathing, it was their vigilance, their trained alertness. To Aelith, sleeping near a guard who is constantly scanning for threats would be like trying to sleep next to an alarm that never stops. Thessara closed her eyes, and Ren, standing near the door, understood something he wished he did not. The reason Aelith had slept beside him. He had been deeply asleep, exhausted beyond performance, beyond vigilance. His mind had been silent. And for a child drowning in everyone else's feelings, silence was oxygen. Why, Thessara said carefully, why did no one detect this before? Thorane met her gaze squarely. Because your systems do not test for it. They measure heart rate, cortisol, physical indicators. They are excellent at determining whether someone is in danger. They are not designed to determine whether someone is in pain. Thessara turned away, walked to the window, stood there with her back to the room. Her reflection in the glass showed a face that Ren had never seen on a queen before. Not anger, not authority, guilt. She told me, Thessara said quietly, months ago. She told me the world was too loud, and I said she was strong. Thorane did not respond. There was nothing medical to say. I protected her from everything I could see, assassins, political threats, environmental hazards, and I missed the one thing that was actually hurting her. In the adjacent room, he recognized that voice. The voice of a parent who has just discovered they were looking in the wrong direction. He had heard it in his own head 1,000 times. If I had been home, if I had been faster, if I had listened differently. The shape of that regret was always the same, no matter the species. Thessara made the decision that evening. You will remain, she told Ren. They were in the corridor outside Aelith's quarters. The girl had been put to bed by Thorane. Not with sedatives, just a frequency modulator that dampened ambient emotional noise in her room. A simple device, available for years, never installed because no one had identified the need. Thorane had been furious about this, not at anyone specifically, at the entire concept of a system that could track a child's heartbeat from across the palace, but could not detect that she was suffering. Ren stood at attention, or what he hoped was attention. Remain, he repeated, with Aelith for a trial period, under observation. You want me to? I want my daughter to sleep, Thessara said, and the way she said it, the way the word sleep carried the weight of weeks of watching a child deteriorate. It was not a command, it was a confession. This is not trust, she added. It is investigation. Ren nodded. Understood. You will be monitored. Your psychological profile will be evaluated. Your history reviewed. I would expect nothing less. And you will explain to me, over time, what you meant when you told my daughter that being brave means not leaving. Ren said nothing, because the honest answer would require telling her about Mika, and he was not ready. But Thessara saw it, the shadow of it across his face. She recognized it, because queens carry their losses differently than soldiers, but they carry them. Go, she said. She sleeps better when you are near. I want you in the adjacent room, door open. If she wakes, you respond. Yes. And Corporal, if you fail her, I will not require a reason. Understood. I walked to the room, sat on the edge of a chair that was far too elegant for him, listened to the sound of a child breathing through an open door, and began his vigil. The days that followed rearranged themselves around a new center of gravity. Quiet, tentative. Ren learned the geography of Aelith's world. Her mornings began with tutoring, languages, history, diplomatic theory, subjects delivered by instructors who treated a 6-year-old as if she were a very small diplomat, which she was, technically, but also she was 6. Ren sat in the corner during lessons. He had been told to observe, not participate. This lasted 2 days. On the 3rd day, Aelith was struggling with a passage about the formation of the Third Alliance. The tutor was explaining, patiently, in the way that patient people explain things when they have forgotten what it feels like not to understand. Aelith's ears were flattening. The emotional noise of the tutor's rising frustration was washing over her in waves. The tutor herself did not know she was frustrated. She believed she was being patient. She was smiling, using encouraging words. But underneath the smile, underneath the careful pedagogical technique, there was a tightening, a constriction, the feeling of a professional who had explained something 3 times and could not understand why a clearly intelligent child was not absorbing it. Aelith could feel all of this, the smile and the frustration, the kindness and the impatience, 2 layers of the same person pressing against her at once. It was like trying to read a book while someone played music in a different key. Both inputs were clear, neither was comfortable, and the combination was making her head ache. She gripped her stylus tighter, stared at the passage about the Third Alliance. The words blurred, not just from the lesson, from the tutor. The woman's rising frustration leaked out of her in waves that only Aelith could detect. The tutor was smiling, being kind, and underneath the smile, Aelith could feel impatience building like pressure behind a dam. Ren leaned forward. "It is like a group project," he said. Everyone looked at him. 12 systems had to share resources after the collapse. Some contributed more, some complained more. They argued for 40 years. Then someone suggested they just write down the rules so they could stop arguing. That is the Third Alliance. Aelith stared at him. "That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard." "Yes," Ren said, "that is politics." She laughed, a real laugh, bright and uncontrolled, the kind that escapes before permission is granted. The tutor looked horrified. Ren looked at the ceiling, and somewhere in the palace, Thessara received a notification that her daughter's stress levels had just dropped by 30%. She did not respond to the notification, but she read it twice. The tutor filed a formal objection about civilian interference in the princess's education. Thessara read the objection, then scheduled a meeting with the tutor, then canceled the meeting and sent a note that said, "If she is laughing, she is learning. Continue." The tutor did not file another objection. On the second afternoon, Thessara permitted a supervised walk through the lower gardens. Supervised meaning 4 guards at a discreet distance and Ren, who was not discreet but was present. The lower gardens were older than the palace above them, less elegant, more honest. The plants here were not engineered to whisper wisdom or rearrange their colors to match a visitor's mood. They were simply plants, green and tangled and occasionally aggressive. One vine had been slowly consuming a maintenance access panel for what appeared to be several decades. No one had stopped it. The vine had earned a grudging respect. Aelith walked slowly, looking at everything, touching leaves with the careful reverence of a child who had been told many times not to touch things and had learned to do it anyway when no one was watching. "This one is angry," she said, pointing at a thorn bush. Ren looked at it. "It is a plant. It is an angry plant. Can you not feel it?" "I cannot feel plants." "That is because you are not listening properly." He squinted at the bush. "What is it angry about?" "It does not get enough sunlight. That wall is in the way." She pointed at a stone partition casting a permanent shadow. "It has been trying to grow around it for a long time." Ren looked at the bush, then at the wall, then back at Aelith. "You can feel plant emotions. Plants do not have emotions. They have intentions. This one intends to reach the sun. That is what angry feels like when you are a plant." He decided not to pursue this line of questioning, partly because he did not understand it, partly because he suspected she was right. They walked for another 20 minutes. Aelith cataloged the garden with the intensity of a researcher conducting fieldwork. This plant was content. That one was competing with its neighbor. The small flowering cluster near the water recycler was confused because someone had moved its pot. Ren listened, not because he believed plants had feelings, but because watching Aelith describe the world as she experienced it, A world saturated with the emotional states of every living thing was extraordinary and deeply exhausting to contemplate. She lived in a version of reality that most people could not imagine, where every room was full of invisible information, where every crowd was a storm, where even a garden had a mood. No wonder she needed silence. Ren, she said, stopping near a bench carved from petrified wood. Yes. Why are you quiet inside? Other people are always loud, even when their mouths are closed. But you are like the garden at night. He thought about this. I think I just ran out of things to feel loudly. That is not true. You feel things, but they are deep, like sounds underwater. She climbed onto the bench. Mika, she said, testing the name the way you test ice before stepping. His chest tightened. Yes. The feelings about her are the deepest ones, at the bottom of everything, like rocks in a river. That is a good way to describe it. But rocks at the bottom of a river are still part of the river. They give it its shape. Ren sat beside her, looked at the angry bush, the confused flowers. When did you start understanding things like this? I do not understand things. I feel them. Understanding is what other people do after. She swung her feet, looked at the filtered sky. I am glad you are here, she said. I am glad I am here too. Even though the food is strange and the forks are confusing. Even though. She smiled, and for a moment, in a garden full of plants with opinions, two people sat together and needed nothing to be named. Evenings were when Ren told stories, not official stories, not the carefully curated tales from the palace library, categorized by age, filtered for content, optimized for developmental impact. Ren told the stories he had told Mika. The knight who was tired, the star that got lost, the comet who gave bad directions, the little ship that was afraid of space but went anyway because someone had to deliver the mail, the planet that sneezed and created a new moon by accident. He told them in the same voice, the same rhythm, the same pauses in the same places. And sometimes, in the middle of a story, he would stop, because the words would catch on something, some detail that belonged to a different room, a different bed, a different child's face looking up at him in the half-dark. Aelith noticed every time. She did not ask why he stopped. Not at first, she just waited. Patient in the way that children are patient when they sense that an adult is carrying something heavy and needs a moment to set it down. On the fourth evening, he was telling the story of the lost star, the one that asked a comet for directions and ended up in the wrong galaxy. Mika's favorite, the one she had made him tell so many times that he had developed alternate endings in a cast of supporting characters and a subplot involving a nebula with anxiety. He reached the part where the star finds a small planet to rest on, and the planet says, "You can stay, I have room." And his voice broke, not dramatically, just a crack, like a line appearing in glass. Aelith looked at him, those dark eyes that saw too much. That was her story, she said. Was it not? Mika's. He had mentioned the name once, days ago, in passing, half a sentence. He had not realized she was listening so carefully. But of course she was. She listened to everything. That was her curse and her gift. Yes, he said. The word cost him something he would never get back. What happened to her? Ren looked at everything in the room except the face of the child who was asking. The ceiling, the modulator, the small pile of books that Aelith arranged by color rather than title. She went away, he said, and I could not follow. Aelith was quiet for a long time. Then she reached out, small hand, warm fingers, and took his. Did she like the ending? Aelith asked. Where the star finds a place to stay. Ren nodded. He did not trust his voice. Then that is the real ending, Aelith said, with the absolute authority of someone who understood that stories belong to the people who love them. The star stays, because someone had room. Ren held her hand, and for the first time in 3 years, he said his daughter's name out loud, not in a dream, not in a whisper to an empty room. Mika liked that ending too. It was not healing. Healing is a word people use when they want grief to be a project with a completion date. This was something smaller and stranger, but Aelith's hand was warm, and somewhere inside the structure he had built around his loss. A window cracked open, just enough for air. Counselor Vorin requested the emergency session on the 5th day. He filed the motion through proper channels, cited proper codes, used proper language. Everything about the request was impeccable, because Vorin was the kind of man who weaponized propriety. How was tall, narrow, with features that suggested evolution had optimized his species for committee meetings. His ears were shorter than most of his kind, held at precise angles that conveyed nothing. He spoke in measured tones that made everything sound reasonable, even the unreasonable things, especially the unreasonable things. Vorin had served on the High Council for 23 years. He had survived 4 administrations, 2 succession crises, and 1 incident involving a rogue AI that had briefly seized control of the Treasury and attempted to redistribute wealth according to what it called fairness, which had caused more panic than any military threat in recent memory. Through all of it, Vorin endured, not because he was brave, not because he was wise, but because he understood something that braver and wiser people often missed. Power does not live in the crown. It lives in the process. Control the procedure, shape the agenda, define the terms, and the person wearing the crown will eventually stand where you have built the floor. Vorin did not dislike the Thesara. That would have been personal. He simply believed, with the deep conviction of a man who had never been proven wrong in a committee setting, that the empire required order, that order required predictability, and that a queen who allowed a human soldier of no rank to sleep beside the heir to the throne was introducing a variable that could not be controlled. I had studied Aelith's schedule, her patterns, her stress responses, her tendency to seek quiet places when overwhelmed. He had known, with the patient certainty of a man who studied variables the way astronomers study orbital mechanics, that the convergence would be the breaking point. Too many delegates, too much noise, too long a day for a child who was already running on empty. And so he had waited, and when the moment came, he had removed 14 seconds of tracking data, just enough to delay the alert, just enough to widen the gap between a child wandering and a child being found. He presented his case to the assembled council. 7 members, 3 attending remotely as projections that flickered at the edges, 2 attending physically but clearly wishing they were projections. The events of the Alliance convergence represent a systemic failure, he began, his voice filling the chamber with the practiced cadence of someone who had rehearsed concern until it was indistinguishable from the real thing. The princess was absent from a state function for over 1 hour. She was found in a restricted military zone, in the company of an unvetted non-native soldier. He paused. Let the facts settle. Facts were his preferred weapon. They required no emotion. They simply existed, and in the right arrangement, they could cut. Queen Thesara has since installed this soldier as an informal companion to the princess, without council approval, without psychological evaluation, without precedent. Another pause, longer this time, because the word precedent carried particular weight in a room full of people who had built their careers on it. I proposed that the council consider implementing the structured royal education protocol, which would place the princess's development under joint council oversight, not as a challenge to the queen's authority, but as a safeguard for the heir, as the empire deserves. The words were smooth, reasonable, wrapped in concern and protocol in the language of child welfare. But underneath, Wren thought, watching from the gallery, underneath those words was a different sentence entirely. Take the child from her mother. Give her to us. Call it safety. The council murmured. Some nodded, not with enthusiasm, but with the weary acceptance of people who had been in politics long enough to recognize when a tide was turning and did not want to be caught standing still. Thesara sat at the head of the table, Perfectly still, face neutral. She listened to every word, weighed every implication. But Ren, who had spent 5 days watching this woman, saw what no one else saw. Her hands beneath the table, pressed together, knuckles white. She was afraid, not of Vorin. She had faced worse. She was afraid of the possibility he might be right, that she had failed, that her judgment was compromised, that the mother in her was overriding the queen, and that the cost of that override would be measured in her daughter's safety. The session ended without a vote. Thessara requested a 3-day deliberation period. Vorin agreed, graciously, because he knew that time was his ally. Every day the soldier spent with the princess was another day the council could question the queen's judgment. He left the chamber with the stride of a man who believed he had already won. The 3 days of deliberation were the longest of Thessara's reign, not because of the political threat. She had faced worse. Challenges to her authority came in cycles, like weather. You learn to read them and dress accordingly. This was different. This was personal in a way that politics rarely managed to be. Vorin was not challenging her policies or her treaties or her fiscal decisions. He was challenging her as a mother, and the council was listening, because every person in that chamber had seen the data. The empty space beside the dais, the princess found in the barracks, the soldier with no credentials. From the outside, it looked bad. Thessara spent those 3 days reviewing every decision she had made regarding Aelith's care since birth. The guards she had assigned, the schedule she had approved, the tutors she had selected, the physicians she had consulted. Every choice, laid out like pieces of a machine she had built with her own hands. And she realized, with the particular clarity that comes at 3 in the morning when sleep is impossible and honesty is unavoidable, that every single decision had been designed to protect Aelith from external threats. Assassins, kidnappers, political enemies, environmental hazards. Not one decision had been designed to protect Aelith from internal ones, from pain that came from inside, from a gift that no one had diagnosed, from the simple crushing weight of feeling too much in a world that demanded she feel nothing. She had built a fortress facing outward, and the threat had been inside the walls the entire time. The evidence arrived on the second night of deliberation. High Marshal Corvain appeared at Thessara's private chambers at an hour when appearances were inherently alarming. He was not a man who showed emotion easily. His face was built for duty the way a bridge is built for weight. But tonight, something in his expression had shifted. "I have the analysis of the tracking interference," he said. Thessara looked at him. She had not slept. This was visible in the specific quality of stillness that settles on people who have been awake long enough to stop pretending they are fine. "Show me." Corvain projected the data. Clean, precise. Each data point verified. The interference with the princess's location signal was not a malfunction, he said. It was a deliberate micro-override. 14 seconds. The authentication signature matches Counselor Vorin's personal encryption. Thessara stared at the data. He did not endanger her directly, Corvain continued. He simply ensured that when she wandered, as he anticipated she would, no one would know immediately. He created a gap and waited for it to become a crisis he could use. Thessara stared at the projection, each data point glowing in the dim room, each one a small fact. And together, they formed a shape she recognized. Not conspiracy, something quieter, more patient. The careful construction of a man who had learned that you did not need to push someone off a cliff. You just needed to remove the railing and wait. He wanted her lost, Thessara said. Not harmed, just lost long enough to prove I could not protect her. That is the assessment. Thessara walked to the window. And his proposal, the education protocol, would effectively transfer guardianship decisions to a committee he chairs. Thessara closed her eyes. When she opened them, something had sharpened. "Good," she said. Corvain paused, which for him was the equivalent of dropping his jaw. "Now I know where he stands," she said. "Now I know how to answer." Prepare the evidence for formal presentation. Verify every data point. It already is airtight. Make it more so. Understood. Corvain hesitated. Unusual for him. There is something else. The soldier, Harlow, his record from Araven. Thesara waited. He lost his daughter in the attack, 4 years old. He requested transfer to Solanthus the following month. His service record since has been exemplary, punctual, unremarkable. Thesara was quiet. I mention this because the council will ask about his psychological fitness, and the answer is complicated. The answer, Thesara said softly, is that he is a man who lost a child and sat beside mine without moving, because he remembered what it meant. Corvain inclined his head. That is not a standard psychological assessment. No, Thesara agreed. It is better. The night before the council vote, Ren sat in the chair beside Aelith's bed. The frequency modulator hummed. Aelith was supposed to be sleeping. She was not. Ren? Yes. You are going to disappear. Are you not? He looked at her. She was sitting up. Blanket pooled around her waist, ears tilted in the angle that meant she already knew the answer and was giving him the chance to be honest. I do not know, he said. The council does not want you here. That is probably accurate. Vorin does not like you. Also accurate. Do you like you? Ren blinked. What? Do you like you? My tutor says that people who do not like themselves try to leave before they are asked to go. He stared at her, 6 years old, and she had just taken him apart with the casual precision of someone pulling a thread from a sleeve. Your tutor is very smart, he said. She is adequate, Aelith replied, which was the most devastating compliment he had ever heard a child deliver. He was quiet, deciding whether to lie, then deciding not to. I do not want to disappear, but some things are not up to me. Most things are not up to me either. That is what being 6 is. But you could try, she said, to stay. I am trying. Good, because I do not want you to go away like... She stopped, her ears flattened. She had not meant to say it. The sentence had escaped before she could catch it. Like Mika, Ren finished, quietly. Aelith's eyes filled, not with tears, not yet, with the terrible pressure that comes before. She did not choose to go, Aelith whispered. But she went, and it broke something in you. I can feel it. There is a place in you that is very cold and very still. Ren could not breathe. I do not want another dark room, she said. He reached for her hand, held it. I will not leave voluntarily, he said. And the words came out different this time. Not a promise made from duty, something deeper, something built from the specific grief of a man who has learned exactly what it costs to be absent. Whatever happens tomorrow, I will fight to stay, not because it is my job, but because you asked me to. Aelith nodded, satisfied, with the particular satisfaction of someone who has extracted the commitment they needed and intends to hold it accountable. Good, she said. Now tell me the story about the comet. He laughed softly. Which one? The one who gave bad directions. Yes, but this time, the comet should get lost too, so the star is not alone. Ren started the story, and his voice was steady, outside the door. Thesara stood in the corridor. She had come to check on Aelith, as she did every night, without guards, without announcement. She had heard everything. The conversation about disappearing, about dark rooms, about the cold place inside a man who had lost his daughter, about her own daughter who could feel that cold from across a room and was brave enough to name it. Thesara pressed her back against the wall, closed her eyes, and made a decision. Not a political decision, not a strategic calculation, not the kind of decision that required data or deliberation or 3 days of committee review. A decision made from the floor of herself, from the place where mother and ruler met and argued, and tonight, for the first time, agreed. Tomorrow she would face the council. She would present the evidence against Vorin. She would defend a soldier who snored and told stories about lost stars and held a child's hand with the careful desperation of a man who had already lost everything once. And she would win. Not because she was queen, not because she was powerful, because her daughter had asked someone to stay, and that someone had said yes. And that simple, ordinary act, one person choosing not to walk away from another person's child, was worth defending. Thesara opened her eyes, straightened, adjusted her expression to the mask of composed authority that the palace expected. But underneath, a mother was ready for war. The council chamber smelled like decisions, not literally. But Ren had spent enough time in rooms where important things happened to recognize the particular quality of air that gathered when powerful people were about to disagree. Sharp, metallic, like the moment before a storm breaks over open water. The chamber was circular, ancient, its walls etched with the records of choices that had ended wars and started others. Every mark in the stone was a scar from a decision someone had to live with. Some of those scars were centuries old. They had not faded. Today would add another. Council members filled their seats, 7 present physically, 3 as projections that flickered at the edges, giving them the unfortunate appearance of people who were not entirely committed to being here, which, Ren suspected, was accurate. Hai sat in the observer gallery, a raised section along the wall meant for witnesses and advisors, people whose presence was required but whose opinions were not. He had been told to wear clean armor. He had done his best. The chest plate was properly fastened for once. His boots were polished. His posture was straight. He looked, he thought, like a man attending his own sentencing. Captain Rena sat 3 seats away. She had arrived without explanation, taken her place, nodded once at Ren. The nod said everything it needed to. I am here. Whatever happens. He nodded back, and that was enough. Thesara entered last, not because she was late, because she understood timing. She waited until every seat was filled, every eye settled, every projection stabilized. Then she walked in, crown in place, robes formal, ears held in the precise angle of attentive authority. She moved to the head of the table, did not sit, remained standing. A queen who stands while others sit controls the vertical axis of the room. Everyone must look up. Aelith was not present, not yet. Thesara had arranged for her to wait in an adjacent chamber with Therain and the frequency modulator and a supply of sweet cakes that the kitchen had provided without being asked. Because even kitchens take sides. Counselor Vorin sat at the far curve of the table, composed, hands resting flat on the surface. He wore his confidence like pressed cloth, smooth, precise, without a single crease. Thesara surveyed the room, slowly, making contact with each council member individually, not speaking, just looking. The kind of looking that invited each person to consider very carefully which side of this they wanted to be remembered on. Then she spoke. This session was requested to address a failure. Her voice filled the chamber without effort. Not volume, presence. I will define that failure, because I have heard Counselor Vorin's definition, and it is wrong. Vorin's ears shifted, a fraction, the involuntary response of someone who had expected to speak first and was recalculating. The failure, Thesara continued, was not that my daughter left the Alliance Convergence. It was not that she was found in the barracks. It was not that a human soldier was beside her. She paused. Let the silence build like water behind a dam. The failure was that an empire with 1,000 monitoring systems, with the most advanced security architecture in the known galaxy, could not tell me that my daughter was in pain. The room was very still. Thesara gestured. The chamber's projection system activated. Data bloomed above the table, detailed, color-coded, inescapable. These are Princess Aelith's biometric readings, collected over the past 8 weeks. Stress indicators, sleep patterns, emotional frequency mapping, conducted by Dr. Therain, verified independently. The data scrolled, graphs and numbers that told a story more clearly than any speech could. For 6 weeks, my daughter's stress levels were elevated beyond safe thresholds. Her sleep was fragmented, averaging 2 to 3 hours of uninterrupted rest per night. Her emotional load index was 4 times the species norm. She was drowning in plain sight in a palace designed to protect her. Council members leaned forward, some because they cared, some because the data was genuinely alarming and they were beginning to realize they had been arguing about politics while a child was suffering. No system detected this. No protocol triggered an alert because our systems measure whether a person is in danger. They do not measure whether a person is hurting. She let that settle. 7 days ago, Princess Aelith found her way to the barracks sector. She sat beside Corporal Ren Harlow, a human soldier, exhausted, asleep, producing no emotional noise whatsoever. And for the first time in weeks, my daughter slept. The second data set appeared. The contrast was stark, before and after, like looking at a drought and then a garden. This is the evidence, not of my failure as a mother, though I accept that failure freely, but of our failure as an institution. We built an empire that can track a child's heartbeat from orbit, but could not hear her asking for help. Her voice dropped half a register, became warmer, rawer. Counselor Voron's proposal does not fix what broke. It reinforces the same thinking that missed the problem. More procedures, more oversight, more people watching a child who is already overwhelmed by being watched. She turned to Voron. And now, I would like to address a separate matter. The air in the chamber changed. Ren felt it, like a pressure shift before turbulence. High Marshal Corvain, please present your findings. Corvain stood, walked to the center with the deliberate pace of a man who was about to make someone very uncomfortable and intended to be thorough about it. On the day of the Alliance convergence, Corvain began, Princess Aelith's location signal experienced a 14-second interference event. Subsequent analysis determined it was a deliberate micro-override, introduced through a council-level access terminal. He projected the technical data, access logs, authentication signatures, each element verified, cross-referenced, triple-checked. The authentication pattern is consistent with encryption protocols assigned to Counselor Voron's personal terminal. The chamber erupted, not with shouting. Council chambers do not shout. Sharp intakes of breath, chairs shifting, murmurs carrying the specific frequency of people realizing they had been outmaneuvered. Voron did not move. That was the remarkable thing. He sat exactly as he had been sitting, as if the accusation was weather and he was stone. These are serious allegations, Voron said calmly. Authentication patterns are not conclusive identification. They are not, Corvain agreed, which is why I also recovered the session log from the terminal, time-stamped, with biometric confirmation of the user. He projected it. Voron's biometric signature, time of access, duration, 14 seconds, perfectly aligned with the gap in Aelith's tracking data. The chamber went silent. Voron looked at the data, looked at Corvain, looked at the Sara, and for the first time, his composure cracked, not dramatically, a fissure, the expression of a man who had built his strategy on the assumption that no one would check the foundations. Someone had checked. You did not harm my daughter, the Sara said. Her voice was terrifyingly level, as if she were discussing weather rather than betrayal. You did not move her. You did not touch her. You simply ensured that when she wandered, as you knew she would, as anyone who had been watching a 6-year-old struggle through weeks of increasing distress would know she eventually would. No one would know immediately. Voron said nothing. You created a gap, and you waited for it to become a crisis you could use, so that you could propose a protocol that would place my daughter under your control. She stepped closer. You used a 6-year-old child as a political instrument. The words landed in the chamber and stayed there. Ren watched from the gallery, his fists clenched on his knees. Not just anger, recognition. He remembered standing in the rubble of his home on Aravan, understanding that the attack had not been aimed at his colony at all. His daughter had died because two systems had a disagreement, and his home was in the way. Aelith had been in the way too, not of weapons, of ambition. And somehow, in a way he could not explain but felt in his bones, that was worse. "What do you propose?" one council member asked Thessara carefully. The question of someone testing the ground before stepping. And here, Thessara did something that Ren did not expect. She did not call for punishment. She did not demand removal. She did not unleash the fury that anyone could see she was carrying behind those perfectly still ears. "I propose nothing against Counselor Vorin," she said. The chamber shifted, confused. Vorin acted according to his beliefs. He believes that control is safety, that systems rigid enough can protect a child better than a parent, that the empire's stability matters more than one person's judgment. She looked at him, not with anger or triumph, with recognition, the way you look at a mirror that shows you something you would rather not see. "I know this belief because I shared it. For years, I trusted protocols more than presence. I built the same structures around my daughter that Vorin is proposing. More monitors, more guards, more careful controls. And it failed. Not because it was weak, but because it did not listen." She turned back to the council. Vorin's error was not his philosophy. It was his method. Using a child to advance a political position is unacceptable. The record will reflect this. But the impulse underneath, the belief that safety can be engineered without understanding, that is a mistake we all share. Vorin stared at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Not remorse, not yet, but the beginning, the first uncertain step of a man confronting the possibility that he had been wrong. Not about what he wanted, about what he was willing to sacrifice to get it. "The data on his actions will remain in the official record," Thessara said. "The council may draw its own conclusions about trust." She let that hang, because everyone in the room knew. A man whose manipulation was in the public record was a man whose influence was already gone. Not by decree, by consequence. Every future vote, every corridor conversation that paused when he approached, every committee meeting where his suggestions were received with the particular courtesy reserved for people no one quite trusts anymore. Not punishment. Something worse. Transparency. "There is one more thing," Thessara said. She gestured toward the side door. It opened, and Aelith walked in. Small, 6 years old, wearing a dress slightly less formal than the occasion demanded, because Thorane had insisted that comfort mattered more than protocol. And Thorane was not someone people argued with twice. Her crown was straight for once. Her ears were up, not tense, not flattened, just present, alert. She had not been told what to say. Thessara had been specific about this. No scripts, no coaching, no carefully rehearsed lines designed to manipulate the council's emotions. Whatever Aelith said would be her own words. Because the entire point, the entire reason for bringing her before the council, was that this child had a voice, and it was time someone listened to it. Thorane had prepared her, not with speeches, with the modulator turned to a setting that would reduce the emotional noise in the chamber to a manageable level, and with a simple instruction. Say what is true, Thorane had told her. Nothing more, nothing less. Aelith had nodded, then asked if she could bring a sweet cake in case she got hungry during the serious talking. Thorane had allowed it. The sweet cake remained in Aelith's pocket, untouched, but knowing it was there seemed to help. She walked to the center of the chamber, unhurried, looked around at the faces, the projections, the ancient walls with their scars of old decisions. Then she looked at her mother. Thessara nodded. Once. Aelith turned to the council. "My mother said I could talk," she began. Her voice was clear, smaller than the chamber but somehow filling it. So I am going to talk. And I will be quick because this chair is too tall and I cannot reach the armrests. A council member coughed, not from illness, from the effort of not laughing. I do not need more people watching me, Aelith said. I have lots of people watching me. There are guards and drones and systems and counselors and tutors and people who check if I eat enough and people who check if I sleep enough, and none of them ask me what I actually need. She paused, not for dramatic effect, because she was 6 and needed to remember the next part. What I need is someone who sits still and does not bow and does not look at me like I am going to break, and lets me talk about the quiet places in my head without telling me I will grow out of it. She looked up at the gallery, found Ren. Her expression brightened, the way a compass finds north, instantly, without calculation. He does that, she said. He is not very good at other things. His armor is always wrong and he snores and he does not know which fork to use at dinner. But he sits still and he listens. And when I am near him, my head does not hurt. The chamber was silent, not the political silence of calculation, the other kind, the kind that happens when a room full of powerful people is reminded that all their power exists to serve someone exactly like the child standing in front of them. Aelith looked back at the council, drew herself up to her full 3.5 feet. I do not need more walls. I need a window. She stepped back, folded her hands, looked at her mother. The look said, I am done. Was that correct? Thesara's expression in that moment was something the palace recording systems would capture but never understand. It was the face of a woman watching her daughter become a person, not a symbol, not a future, not a responsibility on an agenda. A person with a voice. Thank you, Thesara said softly. Then she turned to the council, her voice the queen's voice again, but different now, warmer, clearer. I am making a decision, not a proposal, not a request for deliberation. A decision. She paused. Corporal Ren Harlow will be reassigned, effective immediately. His new designation will be Guardian of Presence, a title that has not existed before, because the need it addresses was not recognized before. She looked at Ren across the chamber, and what passed between them was not gratitude or authority, it was understanding. The specific understanding of two people who have both lost something precious and have somehow ended up in the same room with one small reason to stay. His role will be to protect the emotional well-being of Princess Aelith, not her safety. We have guards for that. Not her education. We have tutors. His role is to ensure that my daughter has access to silence, to calm, to a presence that demands nothing of her except that she be herself. She turned back to the council. Additionally, I am ordering a reform of the palace monitoring systems. Security assessments will now include emotional load metrics, empathic sensitivity screening, well-being indicators that measure not whether a person is in danger, but whether they are in distress. This applies to the princess, and eventually, to every child in this empire. She let the words settle. She outlined the specifics. The new metrics would be developed in conjunction with Dr. Thurain's research team. Baseline assessments for all royal staff and household members within 30 days. Training programs for guards and attendants on recognizing emotional distress signals. A redesign of the princess's daily schedule to include mandatory low-stimulus periods. We will also be creating a review board, Thesara continued, to examine historical cases where children in high-profile positions within the empire showed signs of emotional distress that went unaddressed. I suspect we will find that Princess Aelith is not unique. She is simply the first to be diagnosed, because someone finally thought to look. She paused. And we will look, going forward. We will look not just for danger, but for silence. For the children who stop complaining, not because they are fine, but because they have learned that no one is listening. Because we have been counting threats and missing pain, and that ends today. The council voted, unanimously, not because they all agreed, but because the data was clear. The child's testimony was undeniable, and the Queen's authority, on this day, in this room, after what they had heard, was not something any of them were prepared to challenge. Voron abstained. He sat in his chair as the vote concluded, expression neutral, but a different kind of neutral now, not hiding strategy, having none left. He would not be removed. Thessara had been precise about that. He would remain on the council. His record would carry what he had done, and he would live with the specific weight of a man whose colleagues knew exactly who he was. Every meeting, every vote, every corridor conversation that stopped when he approached. Not punishment, consequence, the kind you carry yourself. Wren did not remember leaving the gallery. He remembered standing, walking. The corridor outside the chamber being very bright and very long. Captain Rena appeared beside him at the exact moment when a person most needs someone to appear beside them. She walked in step with him, said nothing for 30 paces. Then, Guardian of Presence. Wren stared ahead. Yes, that is the most ridiculous title I have ever heard. Yes, you are going to be terrible at it. Almost certainly. Rena looked at him, and her expression softened into something he had not seen from her since the day she signed his transfer. She chose well, Rena said. The Queen. Wren shook his head. Aelith chose. The Queen just agreed. Rena smiled. Same thing. When it comes to mothers and daughters. She clapped him on the shoulder. Once. Firm, the way soldiers say things that words cannot carry. Then she walked away, her boots echoing down the corridor, steady and sure, the footsteps of someone who had already known how this story would end. Wren stood alone, breathing, letting the weight of what had happened settle into his bones. Guardian of Presence. He was a soldier who snored and told stories about lost stars to a girl who was not his daughter, who had spent 3 years running from a room with a bed near a window and a name he could not say. And now a queen had given him a title and a purpose, and the most terrifying job in the Empire, protecting silence. He laughed, quietly, to himself, and it was the first laugh in 3 years that did not have grief underneath it, just surprise, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. I thought about Mika, not the way he usually thought about her, not with the sharp, glass-edged grief that cut when he breathed too deeply, but differently. As if, for the first time, the thought of his daughter did not require him to also think about failure. She would have liked Aelith. He knew this with a certainty that surprised him. Mika had been fearless in exactly the same way. Not reckless, but unimpressed by things that impressed adults. She would have looked at Aelith's crown and asked if it was heavy. She would have looked at the palace and asked why the walls moved. She would have looked at the council chamber and asked whether anyone ever fell asleep during meetings. Yes, he thought, she would have liked Aelith very much. And Aelith, with her gift for feeling what others felt, would have sensed something in Mika that Wren himself had known but never articulated. That his daughter's particular brightness was not performance. It was genuine. She had been one of those rare people, even at 4, whose inner life matched their outer one. No performance, no masks, just a girl who laughed when she was happy and cried when she was sad and loved with the entire uncomplicated force of a heart that had not yet learned to protect itself. Wren stood in the corridor, and for the first time, he thought about his daughter without flinching. The weeks that followed were strange, and then they were not. Wren learned court etiquette and failed at it consistently. He mixed up the formal address for the Velthari ambassador with the greeting used for sentient gas clouds. This caused a minor diplomatic incident that Thessara resolved by pretending it was intentional. The Velthari ambassador was confused but not offended. The sentient gas cloud was delighted. He learned to eat with the correct utensils, or at least the approximately correct utensils. Aelith helped by pointing at the right ones before each course. He got it wrong often enough that it became a game. She started keeping score on a small data pad she kept tucked in her dress pocket. The current tally: Wren, 7, Forks, 43. He learned the palace layout, not the official maps with their color-coded sectors and access levels. He learned the other map, the one that mattered, the quiet corridors, the rooms where the emotional noise was lowest, the garden bench near the eastern wall where the plants did not whisper advice, the maintenance corridor on level 7 where the only sound was the hum of recycled air, the observation deck above the northern wing where the sky was visible and the stars, though filtered through palace shields, were still stars. He built a map of silences and memorized every one. Aelith learned too. She learned that not all adults needed to be managed, that some of them said what they meant and did not require careful interpretation. She learned that questions were not always tests, that sometimes a conversation was just two people talking because it felt good. She learned to name what she felt, not the emotions of others, but her own. The difference between tired and overwhelmed, between lonely and quiet, between sadness that needed company and sadness that needed space. Wren taught her this, not through lessons, through example, by naming his own feelings with clumsy, honest words. I am tired today. I am sad today, but it is the old sadness, not a new one. I am happy right now, and that feels strange because I forgot what it was shaped like. Aelith absorbed these and began to offer her own. My head is full today, but the thinking full, not the bad full. I feel worried, but I do not know about what. I am happy that you are here, and I want you to know. Thessara observed, intervened less, listened more. She sat on the floor during lessons, something she had not done since Aelith was an infant. She let her daughter explain things instead of commanding attention. She asked questions that began with "What do you think?" instead of "This is what you should know." She removed 2 of the 4 guards outside Aelith's bedroom, installed the frequency modulator permanently, adjusted the room's settings to Aelith's specific sensitivity profile. Small changes, each one a stone removed from a fortress she had built with the best intentions. Knowing that every fortress meant to protect also prevents the person inside from reaching out. And at night, Aelith slept. That alone changed everything, because a child who sleeps is a child who can grow. And Aelith, released from the crushing weight of constant emotional noise, began to become someone that no protocol or program could have predicted. She was funny, genuinely, devastatingly funny, with humor that arrived from unexpected angles and left adults blinking. She once told a visiting dignitary that his ceremonial hat looked like a confused bird. The dignitary laughed so hard he had to sit down. His aide later confirmed that the hat did, in fact, resemble a confused bird. She was kind, not the performed kindness of royalty trained to appear benevolent, but real kindness, the kind that notices when someone is uncomfortable and adjusts without being asked. When a young guard stationed outside her door looked nervous on his first day, she brought him a sweet cake and told him that the door was not going anywhere so he could relax. She was fierce. When a visiting dignitary spoke condescendingly to Wren, calling him palace decoration, Aelith turned to the dignitary and said with perfect calm, "He is not decoration. He is my person, and you are being small." The dignitary had apologized to Wren, to Thessara, to 3 separate deities, and to a potted plant he had backed into during his retreat. One evening, 3 weeks after the council session, Thessara found them in the garden. Wren was sitting on the bench near the eastern wall. Aelith was beside him, her head resting against his arm, not sleeping, just resting. The way children rest when they feel so safe that consciousness becomes optional. The plants around them were quiet, even the ones that usually whispered. Thessara stood at the entrance of the garden path. She had come without crown, without guards, simple robe, bare feet on the cool stone path. She looked, Wren thought, when he noticed her, like a person, not a queen, not a symbol, Not the weight of a crown and 1,000 years of dynasty. Just a woman, tired, standing in a garden, looking at her daughter. "May I?" she asked. Ren started to stand. Thesara raised a hand. "Stay, I was not asking you to move, I was asking to join." She walked to the bench, sat on the other side of Aelith. The bench was not designed for three, slightly too narrow, slightly awkward. The kind of bench that forces people closer together than protocol would normally allow. Aelith opened one eye, saw her mother, smiled. "Hi." "Hello." "You are not wearing your crown. It is heavy, and the garden does not care about rank. The garden is smart." Ren looked at Thesara. She looked different without the crown, smaller somehow, though she was taller than him. It was not about height, it was about weight. Without the crown, without the robes and the protocol and the careful architecture of authority. She was just a woman on a bench, a mother sitting beside her daughter. Tired in the way that all parents are tired. The particular exhaustion of caring about something so much that the caring itself becomes the heaviest thing you carry. He had seen that exhaustion in the mirror 3 years ago, before Aravan, when Mika was alive and teething and waking every 2 hours, and he had walked through his days in a fog of love and sleep deprivation, and the constant low-grade fear that something might happen to this small, perfect person who depended on him for everything. He had not appreciated that exhaustion when he had it. He would give anything to have it back. Thesara laughed, small, surprised by it. They sat in silence, the three of them, on a bench that was too small, in a garden that was too quiet, under a sky that was filtered through palace shields and looked nothing like real stars, but was beautiful anyway. Aelith reached for her mother's hand, held it, then reached for Ren's, held that too, connected. A bridge between two people who might never have spoken to each other if not for one small girl who walked away from a party and followed the silence. "Your head is loud tonight," Aelith said to Thesara. Thesara closed her eyes. "It is always loud. I know, you worry about everything, all the time, even when you sleep." "That is what being queen means." Aelith shook her head. "No, you are scared even when nobody is chasing you. I can feel it." Thesara's eyes brightened. "When did you get so smart?" she whispered. "I listen. You should try it." Ren coughed, violently, to cover the laugh that had absolutely escaped. Thesara shot him a look. He studied the garden with intense fascination. "She is right," Thesara said quietly. "I should listen more." "Then listen to this," Aelith said, and her voice was different now. Not a child performing for an audience, not a princess delivering a rehearsed line, just a girl holding her mother's hand in a garden, being honest. "I am okay now. My head is better. I sleep. I am not scared anymore. But you are still scared, and I can feel it. And it makes me scared again." Thesara's grip tightened on her daughter's hand. "So you have to be okay too," Aelith said. "Not pretend okay, real okay, because I cannot be well if you are not. That is how it works." And there it was, the thing that no council session or data analysis or medical evaluation had been able to produce. The truth, simple and devastating and delivered by a 6-year-old on a garden bench. The truth that no monitoring system could detect because it lived in the space between two people who loved each other, where no device could reach. Thesara turned to Ren, her eyes wet, not with sadness, with the specific overwhelm of someone who has been carrying weight for so long that the moment someone acknowledges it, the relief is almost worse than the burden. "You will stay," she said. It was not a command, not a repetition of the assignment. It was a request, from one person to another. "I will stay," Ren said. Aelith squeezed both their hands. "Good. Now, both of you, stop talking. This is the quiet part." They stopped talking. The garden breathed. The filtered stars turned slowly above them. The palace hummed its 1,000 systems and tracked its 1,000 metrics, none of which measured what was happening on this bench. 3 people, sitting in silence, holding hands. Later, after Aelith had been carried to bed, after the lights had dimmed and the blanket had been tucked, with the precise care that Ren had learned from watching Thessara, and Thessara had learned from instinct, Thessara came to the room, as she did every night now, without crown, without announcement, bare feet on the floor. She had removed her shoes in the corridor, because that was how Aelith knew she was coming. The absence of the queen's footsteps, replaced by a mother's. She found Aelith asleep, and Ren in his chair, eyes closed, head tilted slightly, mouth open, snoring, not quietly. She sat on the edge of the bed, took her daughter's hand. Aelith's fingers found hers even in sleep, the way roots find water, automatically, without thought. "Knew you would come," Aelith murmured, half asleep, voice soft as dust. "How? Your footsteps got quieter. That means you took your shoes off. You only do that when you are coming to see me." Thessara smiled, held the hand tighter. "He is loud," she whispered, glancing at Ren. "I know," Aelith said, "but it is a good loud. It means he is still here." Thessara understood. She sat there for a long time, longer than usual. She watched the modulator's soft light pulse in the corner. She watched Aelith's ears twitch once in her sleep, dreaming about something. Plants, probably, or comets giving bad directions. She watched Ren shift in his chair without waking, his face peaceful in a way it never was during the day, as if sleep was the only place where he allowed himself to stop standing guard. 3 people, in a small room, breathing together. This was not the empire she had been trained to build. The empire of her training was systems and control and measured responses. It was protocols and precedents in the careful management of variables. But this quiet room, this breathing dark, this was the empire that mattered, the one built not from stone and light in adjusting gravity, but from the simple decision to stay, to show up, to sit in a too small chair beside a too small bed and snore loudly enough that a child could hear you were still there. She sat there, in the dim room, holding a small hand, listening to a soldier snore, feeling the empire turn slowly around them, somewhere far beyond the shields, far beyond the filtered light and the managed sky and the careful simulations of weather that the palace provided. The real stars burned, ancient and indifferent to the small dramas of the beings who named them. They had witnessed the birth and death of civilizations, the rise and fall of empires that made Solanthus look like a child's drawing. They would witness more, but they would not witness this quiet room, this held hand, this soldier's snore, because some moments exist only for the people inside them. Some moments are so small and so ordinary, and so exactly what someone needed that the universe does not bother to record them. Only the people remember. And Thessara, sitting in the dark, holding her daughter's hand, knew she would remember this for the rest of her life. Not the council session, not the vote, not the evidence against Vorin or the reforms she had announced or the title she had created for a soldier who could not fasten his armor. This, the breathing, the warmth, the small hand in hers, the particular piece of a room where 3 people had chosen each other, knowing that somewhere in this palace, Vorin was sitting alone with the weight of his record, knowing that somewhere Corvain was running the new monitoring protocols, knowing that somewhere Thurain was calibrating sensitivity profiles and being irritated about something, knowing that all of it, every system and protocol and reform, existed because one small girl had walked out of a celebration and followed the silence. But in this room, in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the hand in hers, the breathing in the dark, the simple, ordinary, extraordinary fact that 3 people had found each other. Not through systems, not through protocols, not through the careful machinery of an empire that tracked everything and understood nothing. Through silence, through the courage to sit still, through a girl who walked away from everything that was supposed to protect her and found the one thing that actually could. Not a fortress, not a system, not a title or a protocol or 1,000 monitoring tools. A person who stayed. The palace recorded the time, the temperature, the biometric signatures of 3 individuals in proximity, heart rate synchronized, sleep quality optimal. It filed the data, noted no anomalies. But that was the palace. And the palace, for all its brilliance, for all its frozen wave ceilings and constellation walls and gravity-adjusting floors, had never understood the only thing that truly mattered, that empires are not built on strength, they are built on the people who stay.